What's going on, everybody? Welcome back, and welcome to those of you that are here for the first time. Today we'll be reading Mark chapter 8. I'm reading from the NLT, the New Living Translation. I also have the Geneva Bible 1560 edition. I'll be using that as a kind of a cross-reference to go back and forth. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive in. Jesus feeds 4,000. About this time, another great crowd had gathered, and the people ran out of food again. Jesus called his disciples and told them, "I feel sorry for these people. They have been here with me for 3 days, and they have nothing left to eat. And if I send them home without feeding them, they will faint along the road, for some of them have come a long distance. How are we supposed to find enough food for them in the wilderness?" His disciples asked. "How many loaves of bread do you have?" he asked. 7, they replied. So Jesus told all the people to sit down on the ground. Then he took the 7 loaves, thanked God for them, broke them into pieces, and gave them to his disciples, who distributed the bread to the crowd. A few small fish were found too, so Jesus also blessed these and told the disciples to pass them out. They ate until they were full, and when the scraps were picked up, there were 7 large baskets of food left over. There were about 4,000 people in the crowd that day, and he sent them home after they had eaten. Immediately after this, he got into the boat with his disciples and crossed over to the region of Dalmanutha. Hopefully I said that correctly. So here we see again that we just read in chapter 6 how Jesus fed the 5,000 men, right? And his disciples again are, wondering like, how are we going to feed all these people here in the wilderness, right? They seem to have completely forgot what Jesus had just done, a couple of chapters back. And it kind of same thing happens with us too. Like I know for me personally, I'm almost constantly chasing for some kind of a reassurance, reconfirmation, right? That God is doing work in my life and etc. And we can see this, firsthand with his disciples as well. Like they quickly forget what God has done for them, and they're like, "Well, I don't know. What are we gonna do? Jesus is gonna do the things that Jesus does, right?" And I want to point out also, I talked about this throughout several videos, but whenever you see the number 7 in scripture, it almost always seems like it falls in with some kind of a divine intervention happening. So in this case, we see it with, there were 7 loaves of bread, right? He blessed those to pass them out to people. And then they also gathered 7 baskets of food left over after everybody has ate. And they mentioned that there was 4,000 men. As I've kind of said before, they say men. However, we don't know if there were women and children included in that count. If not, then obviously the number was much greater than just 4,000 men. All right, let's continue. Pharisees demand a miraculous sign. When the Pharisees heard that Jesus had arrived, they came to argue with him, as per usual, testing him to see if he was from God. They demanded, "Give us a miraculous sign from heaven to prove yourself." When he heard this, he sighed deeply and said, "Why do you people keep demanding a miraculous sign? I assure you, I will not give this generation any such sign." So he got back into the boat and left them, and he crossed to the other side of the lake. So here it says, when he heard this, he sighed deeply and said, in the older translation, it said that, and then he sighed deeply in his spirit. So I think that was pretty interesting, and I wanted to point that out, that he sighed in his spirit, right? Like his spirit was like, "Oh, I'm so tired of these people and their non-belief. Like I keep on doing all these miraculous signs. I keep on showing them. I keep on telling them. The prophets of the old kept on referring to all the things that are happening right now. Like, you guys are the teachers of the religious law. You should be the first ones to see what is actually happening. If you studied the Torah, right, which is the Old Testament for the Jews, or just read through the old scriptures and know what the old prophets are saying, you should be the first ones to realize what is happening. Like, everything that the prophets talked about is happening right now through me. So who am I? I am the Messiah. Like, why are you guys keep on testing me?" So I think it's pretty cool that they mentioned in here that he sighed deeply in his spirit. Like, his spirit was hurting. His spirit was upset with him. Anyways, let's continue. East of the Pharisees and Herod. But the disciples discovered that they'd forgotten to bring any food. Once again. So there was only 1 loaf of bread with them in the boat. As they were crossing the lake, Jesus warned them, "Beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and of Herod." So a couple of things. So first I want to point out the Pharisees. Imagine them as being like the religious leaders, kind of like a pastor, right? Or like a preacher, bishop, what we would understand as now. So the Pharisees were like the religious hierarchy, right? And Herod, so we had two kind of Herods. We learned about both of them in book of Matthew. I don't remember the first one getting mentioned in book of Mark, but the first Herod was Herod the Great. So he ruled from 37 to 4 BC, which is before Christ, ruler of Judea. So we know that Herod the Great, he was the one that once the wise men came to him and they're like, hey, the king of the Jews has been born, like where is he? Right, we followed the stars and the things of that nature. And Herod the Great got pretty afraid about there being some sort of a king being born, even though he knew kind of like the prophecies and stuff. So he ended up slaughtering all the children between the age of 1 to, I believe, 2 or 3, right? All the males in Judea at that time. Thankfully, Jesus and his family were able to escape and went into Egypt because the angel showed up to Joseph, which is Jesus's not biological father, but like adopted father in a way. So they told them to flee to Egypt for that time. And then for the next one is Herod Antipas, which Herod Antipas was the son of Herod the Great, who ruled prior to the birth of Jesus and during the birth of Jesus. So Herod Antipas, he was the guy that John the Baptist was talking about when he married his brother Philip's wife, and he was just like, that's wrong, you shouldn't be doing that. And he ended up killing John the Baptist. Herod Antipas is also the guy that's going to put Jesus on trial right towards the end of the book, where Jesus is betrayed, he's put on trial, and then eventually crucified, dies. And the good news, he rose back from the dead. All right, so just wanted to kind of inform you a little bit of who these people are. All right, so beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and of Herod. They decided he was saying this because they hadn't brought any bread. Jesus knew what they were thinking, so he said, "Why are you so worried about having no food? Won't you ever learn or understand? Are your hearts too hard to take it in? You have eyes, can't you see? You have ears, can't you hear? Don't you remember anything at all? What about the 5,000 men I fed with 5 loaves of bread? How many baskets of leftovers did you pick up afterwards? 12, they said. And then when I fed 4,000 with 7 loaves, how many large baskets leftovers did you pick up? 7, they said. Don't you understand even yet? He asked them. So again, I mean, they just got on the boat. They left the place where Jesus just fed the 4,000. They came across the lake. Some Pharisees came to try to argue. Jesus was like, I'm not dealing with this right now. Left, right? And then immediately after again, so I would assume that this is probably the same day or possibly like that evening or the following day. And they're like, oh man, what are we going to do? So quickly do we forget the things that God does for us, right? And so quickly we forget what we just saw. And I was wondering this, we're going to learn about it in the Old Testament, right? When Moses was leading all his people out of Egypt, God had was almost always present with them, continuously showed them that his presence was there. And the Jews, and then Moses goes up to the mountain to get the 10 Commandments, which we're going to learn about later. And then the Jews, it took them 40 days to completely forget anything about God. And they're like, hey, let's build ourselves an idol to worship in the form of a golden calf, And I was like, when I was reading through that, I was like, that's crazy. People, it's been 40 days. They see all these miracles. How could they forget about God that fast, right? But then I'm seeing here, and also in my own life, personal life, like the disciples, they kept on forgetting. I keep on forgetting a lot of times, and I have to remind myself, no, like he's still active and working and doing things in your life. Like look at the previous examples, right? Look at my previous things that happened in my life. Like he's very clearly working. So please, don't forget, don't fall short, don't be like these guys at this moment. Obviously be like these guys once they became and started spreading the word, right? But in this particular moment here. All right, let's continue. Jesus heals a blind man. When they arrived at Bethsaida, some people brought a blind man to Jesus, and they begged him to touch and heal the man. Jesus took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. Then, spitting on the man's eyes, he laid his hands on him and asked, Can you see anything now?" The man looked around. "Yes," he said, "I see people, but I can't see them very clearly. They look like trees walking around." Then Jesus placed his hands over the man's eyes again, and as the man stared intently, his sight was completely restored, and he could see everything clearly. Jesus sent him home, saying, "Don't go back into the village on your way home." All right, so we read, I believe, in the last chapter when Jesus spit on his fingers and touched the man's tongue to make him talk. Here we see him spitting on the man's eyes in order to make him see. I don't think it's necessarily that he had to do that. Clearly, Jesus is over here casting out thousands of demons from one man, healing everybody that even touches his robes. So he doesn't have to do this. I was trying to do a little bit of research, and it just nobody has a very clear answer for why. It's just all speculations, but it's what people on the internet say, like different articles, is that he was trying to do miracles in different types of ways to show that, everything is possible for God. Also, for this particular moment where he was spitting on the man's eyes, so what I found was several Roman writers and Jewish rabbis thought that spit held a healing property for blindness, right? So that specific article was thinking maybe he's trying to show to the people of that area of that time that believed that spit had some sort of healing properties for the blindness, that this is what he was doing. And every time the response is the same, right? Like, "Oh my goodness, this is so great. God is great. Who's this man that's over here healing everybody?" All right, let's continue. Peter's declaration about Jesus. Jesus and his disciples left Galilee and went up to the village of Caesarea Philippi. As they were walking along, he asked them, "Who do people say I am?" "Well," they replied, "some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, and others say you are one of the other prophets." Then Jesus asked, "Who do you say I am?" Peter replied, "You are the Messiah." But Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him. Jesus predicts his own death. Then Jesus began to tell them that he, the Son of Man, would suffer many terrible things and be rejected by the leaders, the leading priests, and the teachers of religious law. He would be killed, and 3 days later he would rise again. And he talked about this openly with his disciples. Peter took him aside and told him he shouldn't say things like that. So in this translation, it says that Peter took him aside and told him he shouldn't say things like that. I don't exactly understand necessarily, I guess, the translation, but in the older translation here, it says that Peter rebuked him. Not exactly sure. Probably the same thing, right? Telling you, like, don't say that. Jesus turned and looked at his disciples and said to Peter very sternly, "Get away from me, Satan. You are seeing things merely from a human point of view, not from God's." Right, so here we see this, and this was mentioned also in the book of Mark, that it seems to me that even Jesus' disciples, Satan, devil, whoever, was able to get to them, not possess them. I've talked about this in chapter 5, right, that you don't necessarily need to be possessed by the demons or by devil or by Satan or whoever in order to be influenced by them. Right, so I think that's kind of what's happening here. Obviously, Peter is not possessed by Satan, but maybe Satan is over there right next to Peter, whispering into Peter's ear, like, "Hey, this is what you should say," right? And he's like, "Hey, Jesus, don't be saying that." Jesus, obviously being the divine individual, son of God, the Father, right, being God himself, could probably see Satan standing right there next to him, and he's like, "Get away from me, Satan. You do not understand things from God's point of view. You only understand them from your point of view." Let's continue. Then he called his disciples and the crowd to come over and listen. "If any of you want to be my follower," he told them, "you must put aside your selfish ambitions, shoulder your cross, and follow me. If you try to keep your life for yourself, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake and for the sake of the good news, you will find true life. And how do you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your own soul in the process? Is anything worth more than your soul? If a person is ashamed of me and my message in these adulterous and sinful days, I, the Son of Man, will be ashamed of the person when I return to the glory of my Father with the holy angels. Right, so here he mentions, pick up your cross and follow me, right? In this translation, it also says adulterous and sinful days. In the older translations, says in the adulterous and sinful generation, this generation, right? What's interesting to find is that from all the apostles, the 12, one of them obviously Judas Iscariot, the one who betrayed Jesus, he committed suicide. The rest of them, though, except for one, all got brutally murdered for what they were preaching, right? And they were willing to die such horrific deaths because what they saw was so true that they refused to deny it in order to try to save their lives, because what they saw was true, which was the resurrection of Jesus. In fact, that two of them got crucified upside down on the cross because they didn't want to be crucified like Jesus was, right? And one of them got crucified on an X-shaped cross because, again, he didn't want to be crucified like Jesus was. So yeah, I'm not saying to, necessarily go out and try to get killed, but don't be ashamed, definitely, of preaching the word to other people, right? Whether it be your friends, family, whoever, don't be ashamed of that, right? If you're not willing to sacrifice things and to lose your life here in order to save your soul, then you're not going to save your soul, Anyways, thank you guys so much for sticking out with me. I know this was kind of a little bit longer. As always, I love you guys. God bless you and your families, and I hope I see you in chapter 9. Take care.